Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Rose, for asking me to speak. My name is Dan. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Dan.
I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not employed by the treatment center. And I'm going to share a little bit of my personal experience with Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 steps. And I'll try to briefly summarize what it was like before I got in here. I grew up in an alcoholic household. My dad was an alcoholic and a drug addict. My parents got divorced when I was 7, and my dad shot and killed himself in a drunk when I was 9. And my mom, she was emotionally unavailable throughout my childhood. And it was difficult until I found a solution, and that was to drink. Because if I drank, I felt okay on the inside. It didn't really matter what was happening on the outside. Nothing mattered. I could feel fine. I could feel comfortable. And that really was useful for me, especially getting into high school, because I felt so uncomfortable around other people. I always felt like people were constantly judging me and looking at me, and I just being around all those people felt so uncomfortable. I wanted to be there. I wanted to be comfortable. I wanted to be around them, but I just, inside, I didn't feel okay. But I did when I drank. And so I found out that that magic elixir could change everything. It could change my state of mind. And I came to know why my dad drank so much. You know, I remember him always having a drink in his hand, but I didn't really know why, because one time I was thirsty. I think I was like 5 and asked for a drink. And I didn't like the taste of what he had. But anyway, when I was 14 and finally really felt what it was like, then there was no stopping me. So, to summarize, I've been in 5 inpatient treatment centers. I've rolled 2 cars drinking and driving. I've got numerous alcohol and drug-related arrests and convictions. And I went to my first AA meeting when I was 15 because I started getting in trouble, and the court sent me to AA. And I remember seeing a lot of old people sitting around the tables talking about their divorce and their drunk driving and stuff, and I couldn't relate at that time to anything that they were saying about the disease of alcoholism, because they were explaining to me the outward consequences of their drinking, and I hadn't experienced those consequences yet. But that's not at all what it says in the AA literature. In the first step in the 12 and 12, it said when one alcoholic had planted into the mind of another the true nature of his malady, that person could never be the same. And the true nature of the malady is that this is a disease of the mind and body. I suffer from a physical allergic reaction to ethyl alcohol that when I put it into my system, for some reason I don't process it like normal people do. It creates a phenomenon of craving. So the way this allergy works is I get an itch for more. And it becomes so powerful that it doesn't matter what else I had to do the next day. Nothing else matters except getting more. It's always more. So as soon as if I get it started with one, I keep thinking about the next one and the next one, and the compulsion to drink the next one becomes so powerful that nothing matters. Nothing else matters. That's the most important thing. So that's the physical component of this illness. Now the mental component is that I can't make a decision to stop, draw the line in the sand, and stick to it. Left to my own devices, because this thing is in my head too, and it will create a circumstance, a perfect storm, if you will, that will create a mental blank spot where all my good reasons for not taking a drink don't occur to me at that moment. It says that in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against first drink. And I've experienced that happening to myself. I'd be in trouble, I'd be on probation. Like, it would be absolutely insane because I'll get caught or I'll get a piss test. But somehow that stuff doesn't enter into my mind to deter me from doing it. That's absolute insanity, especially when you're facing jail time and maybe you lose a job, wreck a relationship. How can you explain that? There is no explaining it. It's a problem. I got a problem in here. It says the real problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. It's helpful to know about the physical allergy, but it's more imperative to know about the mental obsession, the mental blank spot, because that's the part you can't escape. You can't get away from yourself. You're stuck inside yourself. Doesn't matter where you run to, you're you. And if you've got an alcoholic mind like me, you're going to have to live out the rest of your days with this illness. So that's good news and bad news. If you succumb to it, it leads to jails, institutions, and death. But if you use this as an asset, it can push you toward spiritual growth. If you think about buffaloes or wild elephants on the African plains, you know, they've got a lion that chases them, and it takes out the sick and the weak and the old. But because those lions are there, the whole herd of buffalo or elephant becomes stronger. And so an alcoholic can become stronger because of his illness. I have to do this. If I don't do this, I will die. I know I will, because I've been there. I had tried to kill myself a couple of times just because I felt so hopeless and miserable, and there was a couple of times that I didn't know if I was going to wake up the next day because of what I had ingested the night before. And then I've gotten, like I said, behind the wheel numerous times, and I've rolled 2 cars. So, like, it doesn't matter if I say, hey, you know what? I learned my lesson. I'll never drink and drive again. Put a drink in my hands, and all bets are off. I got to get down to the beer store before they close, and it doesn't matter how drunk I am. Oh, it's going to be okay. Well, sometimes it's not. And so I don't know. That's the thing about alcoholism. I know that I'm powerless over this substance. And once it enters into my body, I don't get to make the decisions anymore. Alcohol is making the decisions for me, and it's my master at that point. So my only hope is to remain completely abstinent. I've tried dabbling in it with one toe, and it always sucks me back in all the way. I'm a blackout drunk. You know, I rarely get mildly intoxicated. And there has been numerous times where I've said to myself, okay, you know, have some normal friends that want to invite you to the bar after work or whatever, and okay, I'm just going to have 2 drinks. I'll tell myself that and really believe it and mean it deep down with all sincerity, because I got to go to work the next day. I'm only having 2 drinks, and then I'll end up closing the bar and feeling like such crap the next day if I even make it to work at all. I mean, I've just done it so many times that I know. And I also know that my mind, my alcoholic mind, will try to shade that truth from me to get what it wants. So it said the insane idea paralleled our sound reasoning. So along with this healthy human being that wants to live and have a better life, there's also a little bit of insanity that's kind of like working against me, and it's all happening inside the same body, same mind. So the only thing that can really tip the scales is a connection with a higher power. Because if I was going to save myself from a problem that was in my own head, I mean, my own head knows all my hidden hiding places and secrets. It'd be like standing in a bucket and trying to pick myself up by the handles. I don't have enough physical strength to fix myself. I need to find a source of power that's greater than my own power, because left to my own devices, I will convince myself to do it again. I know that to be true. And I also know that this is really working for me. July 7th of 2009 is my sobriety date. And this is kind of, I celebrated sort of a golden anniversary this past July. So on 7/7, I celebrated 7 years without a drink. Yeah. Honestly, I had been in and out of AA through court order for 13 years prior to that date. Now, what happened that was different? You know, I'd get 10 months and fall or whatever it was. I never did the steps. That was what was different. I saw them on the wall. I read them. We talked about them at some of the meetings, but I never actually fully gave myself to working through the 12 steps and see what would happen in my own life. I've come up with an analogy that I believe is really accurate about this. If you had a piece of paper, say it was a map, you can study that map. You can know that map really well. You could memorize the map, set the map aside, and if somebody said, hey, where's this or this, you could tell them because you remember from the map. But now this is something different entirely. If you were to actually follow that map to where it's going, to use the map as a guide, then you could find the treasure, you know. So it's one thing to know what the steps are, to memorize them, to read them, but it's a whole other thing entirely, I have found personally, to apply them directly to my life. That's when things started to change. My attitude changed. The way I felt inside started to change. I was restless, irritable, discontented. I hated everybody. I thought everybody else in the world was definitely my problem. There were so many people that had gotten into my way, the cops, the administration at the school, my mom, my sister, my girlfriend, my other girlfriend, that girl. All those people were in my way. And then I realized, okay, what is the common denominator in all these relationships? It's me. I got a problem. And just like it says in the big book, it says alcoholism was only a symptom of a greater malady, and I found that to be true for myself. I had some real character flaws. I was spiritually bankrupt. I didn't know how to interact with human beings in a positive way. I didn't know how to maintain relationships with other people. I didn't know how to deal with life. Alcohol was how I dealt with life. When things got bad, I'd just drink. That was my solution to everything. And then finally that wasn't a solution anymore either. It didn't work. And so I had to do something different. I was brought to the end of my rope. And people say, oh man, how did you get 7 years? Well, I can show you what it looks like from the outside, but there is something that happens to you on the inside. I was just on my knees, crying out to God for help. Now what led me there was the night before, so I'll tell you about my last drink. So on July 6th of 2009, I was doing everything within my power to get my life in order. I thought I had the right girlfriend. I was putting a lot of energy and focus into my job, trying to get everything right on the outside. And I thought, well, if everything is right on the outside, then I'll somehow get right on the inside. Well, my girlfriend grew to hate it when I drank. And if she would see that I had been drinking, she would take off, you know. So it was like I had to keep it kind of a secret toward the end there, because it wasn't accepted. And I did really care about her. And she was off running errands one afternoon. It was a sunny day. And that subtle insanity crept over me and said, hey, you could probably have 2 drinks while she's away and she won't even know. It's my own mind telling me this. My own voice, it sounds, hey, that's pretty reasonable, right? I mean, I've got a history of never having 2 drinks, but my own head's telling me that. So, yeah, okay. So I went down to the gas station. I got 2 22-ounce Ice House Tall Boys. I went back to the house. I'm listening to the radio. I'm drinking these 2 beers. A phenomenon of craving kicked in. I start looking at my watch. I'm thinking, man, if I go back down to the gas station right now, I can have 2 more drinks before she comes home. She's still not going to know. And then it had me. I went back down to the gas station. I got a 22 and a 40. And I went back to the house. And I'm finishing off the 40. And I've thought about this since that happened. And who was it that I was trying to fool? Was I trying to fool myself? Or was I anticipating having to fool her if she were to show up and catch me drinking? And I said, no, I've only had 4 drinks. Because 3 22s and a 40, that's nearly 9 12-ounce beers. And so now I'm feeling a little bit loose after I finish that 40. I'm thinking, God, when she comes home, she's going to know I've been drinking. There's going to be hell to pay. So I made the next most rational alcoholic decision I could make. I went back down to the gas station. I bought a case of beer. And everybody, you know, everybody knows the old hippie. They got this old hippie friend, and you're always welcome at his house as long as you bring a few beers. Well, I went over to that guy's house that night. Monday night. There was no party. There was no reason to get totally smashed. I didn't even call her to tell her where I was going. I just vanished in the middle of the day. And I got totally smashed. And the next morning I'm on my knees dry heaving. And I got my van door open and just... And I'm thinking, what the hell is the matter with me? And it was on that day that it finally occurred to me, even though I had been in and out of AA for 13 years, it was only right then when I realized I'm an alcoholic. I got an illness. I can't stop myself from doing this. That scared the shit out of me. But it also led me back to the rooms of AA. That night, that Tuesday night, there was a men's meeting down in the basement at the East Jordan Health Center. And I just went in there, room full of old guys, and I just like tearing up, crying at the end of the table. I'm an alcoholic, I can't stop, I don't know what's going to happen, you know. Even though, like, this carnage has been happening into my life forever, I was in such a daze that it wasn't until then that I actually realized what was happening to me. It got through to me. This is going to take everything worthwhile in my life unless I figure it out, you know. And I had been exposed to AA long enough to know that there was a solution. I could see it in some of these old guys, you know. Some of their stories, they were worse than mine. And yet they were able to get and stay sober. I'd seen them in there for years. You know, I'd go back out, get in trouble, get knocked back into AA, and those guys were still there. They hadn't drank. So I knew there was something and it could work if I wanted it. And so I desperately set out to do anything. And so that first suggestion, that first night, was to get onto my knees and start asking God for help. And inside of me, there wasn't much of a debate of who God was or what God was. There was no rebellion in me. It was probably because I never really had an overdose of religious education as a youngster. Nobody had turned me away from the idea of God. I didn't really have an idea of God. So I just accepted it. And I started praying to something I didn't know, couldn't see, and didn't understand. Because that's what they told me to do. I was just willing to, okay, that's what I got to do, that's what I'll start doing. And so I started out real simple. I got on my knees in the morning and I said, God, please help me through the day. Please help me to not drink. And at night I'd say thank you because I didn't drink that day. And then I found out helpful things started happening in my life that I couldn't explain. People started coming into my life at the right time with the right message that was relevant to my situation at that time. And I couldn't explain. I didn't put that together. I didn't plan that. So I began to see that something really was happening, that something beyond my conception and beyond human power was coming into my life to help me. I still don't know what it is. I still can't wrap my mind around this conceptual idea that we use such a short word to describe. You could call it love. I don't know. Something had mercy on me. Mercy. Did I deserve any of this? You need to know. When it took me a while before I clearly saw what I had done. The steps helped me to see that. The right teacher came into my life to show me how to work the steps out of the big book. And everything changed. Yeah, it was like having my life flash before my eyes while I was still alive. I could see it clearly. I could see my life from a different perspective. The view had been tainted when I looked at my life through my own eyes. Situations were slightly askew from my own perspective. A lot of justification. Oh, well, if this hadn't happened, this, whatever. But I could see it clearly without, it wasn't tainted by my own point of view. I saw reality, and it was horrifying, because but it was necessary and it was life-giving, and I would never want to scare anybody away from that experience. Don't run away from looking at yourself very clearly and taking it all in. This is what I look like. This is what, you know, I thought all these people in my life, they were monsters, until I tried to get myself in their shoes, look out through their eyes at me and my life, and I began to understand how they felt, why they felt the way that they did, because of my own actions. So this is a little bit further down the road. See how, oh wow, this only got like half an hour. So,
We're not religious about an hour. You can
all right.
take what it takes.
Well, you know, I had a couple of things going through my head. One of them was this idea of freedom. All of us, we desperately want freedom. All of us pretty much rebel against authority figures. We want ultimate freedom, and that's what alcohol did for me. The big book said that it allowed us to act extemporaneously. So that word extemporaneous means without thought. And to describe what that looks like, if I see a pretty girl and I think, man, maybe I should ask that girl out. And then my mind starts telling me, oh no, you know, that it probably wouldn't work out. She'd probably turn you down, and then that would make you feel crummy. And then, you know, you can talk yourself right out of something. But extemporaneously means there's no mental commentary going along with life. You're allowed to just be free. And that's what alcohol did for me. I wasn't afraid of what people thought of what I said or did or how I acted. What they thought of me didn't have any bearing on my actions. I felt free. That was one of the things I loved about it so much. So now how can I experience that without the hangover? Well, first I had to realize that freedom, now this is an interesting word. You think of absolute freedom in terms of a drug addict or an alcoholic. Absolute freedom ends up homeless on the streets. So to put it in another way, now discipline can bring greater freedom. If I've got a friend, he's sailing in Lake Huron right now, and he followed the coastline. He left Lake Charlevoix, went out and around the coast of Michigan, out Lake Michigan, or under the bridge, and he's come down around Lake Huron. And he just texted me the other day, and he made a crossing where the thumb is. There's a big stretch of open water, and he didn't follow the coast. He went straight to the tip because he's going around. He's headed out to the Atlantic Ocean. The first time that he had ever sailed by himself out in open water, couldn't see land. And he said it was very disorienting. But I just followed my compass, and everything turned out fine. So now he has to discipline that boat to follow the heading given by the compass. Similarly, a human being, unless they have some discipline in their life, they will never experience that level of freedom. Now, if you can hold that boat, the captain can hold his ship to a certain level of discipline, he's free to travel anywhere in the world. Now, an alcoholic, if he holds himself to certain disciplines, you're free to go about and do anything you want in this life and live a normal life. But you have to hold yourself to discipline. If you let go of these disciplines, you know that 3 sheets to the wind? You know what that means? That's a sailing term. It means you let go of the sails and they just flop in the breeze and you don't go nowhere. It's just nowhere. And that's what happens to an alcoholic and a drug addict who lets go of the reins. Another way of looking at it is a train that was given total freedom. You take it off its tracks because the tracks represent discipline. Well, the train can't go anywhere without the discipline. It needs a discipline. Similarly, we alcoholics need the discipline of the 12 steps. And the more I learn about this, I learn valuable skills that are benefiting me in all areas of my life. And they brought me a certain amount of peace of mind, so I have less thoughts going on in my head. That's so much more peaceful. Because if you think about what most of the thoughts that are going on in your head are, it's what if this happens, what if that happens? You know, it's like worries about the future or guilt and shame of the past. And that's a nightmare. That's another reason why alcoholics and drug addicts drink and do drugs, is because your mind is constantly tormenting you. Now, how else can you be free of that? I haven't found another way. I mean, the drugs and alcohol were like a temporary solution to that problem, but the 12 steps are a permanent solution, and they don't have a hangover afterward. And the more you do it, the better you get, the healthier you get, the healthier your mind gets. The more I used drugs to deal with the insanity, the more deteriorated I became. So that idea of freedom through discipline was one of the things that I wanted to talk about. Following the steps on the treasure map to find the treasure. They talk about having a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. And the spiritual experience is what is necessary to bring about the vital psychic change that the book talks about. And a psychic change is a change of mind. If I've got an insane mind that condemns me to go back to drinking, I need to have a change of mind in order to escape that. You're probably not going to be able to find that from like a brain surgeon or something. Maybe one day, but they haven't figured it out yet. Now, I would say that this is probably a more gentler way. Before the meeting started, we talked about a hiking trip. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about these miracles. So I ended up down in Austin, Texas, and I met my sponsor there. And I started working through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got into step 9, which is we're making amends. And I began making amends to some of the people that I had harmed in my past. And I had a spiritual experience. And I had a bright light experience. And I started having this inspired thought to go and through hike the Appalachian Trail, which seemed absolutely insane. Because the Appalachian Trail, at least the year that I hiked it, was 2,184 miles long. And it goes through 14 states. I say the reason that I hiked it is because the Appalachian Trail Conservancy is constantly buying up property and adding switchbacks, so it's getting longer. But it was almost 2,200 miles long when I had this big idea, like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. You know, it's like 6 months of walking in the mountains through the woods. I'll do it. And I felt a compulsion to do that. And so anyway, I can't give you the whole story, but there were the miracles. So I started thinking about doing this, and I had bought a camper trailer and trailered it down to Austin, Texas, and I was living in the Royal Palms RV Park. And I own a duplex house. It was one of the things I got newly sober, and I had rented. I was living in one of the apartments for a while, and I had rented it out. Sorry if this is getting technical, but I want to give you a background here. So I rented it out on a 6-month lease to this lady, and I figured in the spring I was going to come back from Texas and move back into my place. But I had an experience while I was down there in Texas, and then I started thinking, well, I'm going to go and through hike the Appalachian Trail next summer, so I'm hoping that this girl wants to continue renting out the apartment. So I called her up, and she said, Dan, when my lease is up, I'm going to be moving in with my boyfriend. And I thought, oh God, this is going to ruin everything. You know, I'd started reading books about the Appalachian Trail, and I got a small window of opportunity to get out there in the spring so I can hike the whole distance and end in the fall before they close Baxter State Park up in Maine. And so I'm thinking, God, I don't know what to do, you know, because the last time I had a vacancy, I went through 10 applications. It took me a month and a half before I found somebody I felt comfortable renting to. And so I didn't know what else to do. I got on my knees. I started praying, God, please send me a tenant. And the very next day, my friend Dawson from Charlevoix called me up just to chit-chat. And I said, hey, man, you know of anybody who's looking for a place? I'm going to have a vacancy. And he said, no, but I could put the for rent sign out in the front yard on my way to work. I said, that'd be great. 3 hours later, I got a call from a lady named Deb. And she said, hey, Dan, I'm interested in your place. And I'm thinking, yeah, okay. It was the beginning of a long, drawn-out process. I said, you got to have good credit, and you got to have a steady job for me to consider renting to you. And she said, well, I've got great credit, but I don't have a job yet because I'm only just now moving to northern Michigan to be near my grandkids. She said, to ease your mind about renting to me, how about I paid you 6 months' rent in cash in advance? Are you serious? I said, yeah. Oh, thank you, God. Like, now my faith is beginning to build. I want to talk about that a little bit. Some of you may have spent a lot of time praying and asking God for things and not seeing anything happen. Now, I would liken that to sitting in a car, revving up the engine without having the transmission in gear. If you got it in neutral, it doesn't matter how much you rev the engine and pray, and oh God, please do this and that for me. You're not going to get anywhere. You got to engage the clutch and put it into gear. I never knew how to do that before coming into AA. Now, if you've ever been in an AA meeting, they have the Lord's Prayer at the end of the meeting that says, Our Father. So, if God is the Father of us all, why would I think that I would get any special treatment from God when I had hurt so many of his other children and never did anything to try and fix it? If God started answering all my prayers and some of these other people that had been hurt by me were to look over and say, gosh, look at what, they would be mad at God. So I needed to first go out and start making amends before I could get the transmission into gear and start seeing things happen in my life, to really see the power of faith when I knew that God could hear my voice. It came because I was sorry for what I had done, and I had tried to go out and reach out to those people and start making... I recognized it. And every time I go out to offer that, I mean, I've been working on amends for a lot of years. I've made a lot of amends. Let me tell you about some of my amends. They're some of the most beautiful things that I've experienced through the 12 steps. And hopefully I got enough time to get back to that story, but this is better. Okay, so one of the most horrible things that I had ever done, I used to sleep with this guy's girlfriend, and I did it regularly. And I think that he was... intimidated by me at that time because I was pretty nuts, and he never confronted me about it. And one night I finished off a bottle of Dos Gusanos, and I started calling her. It was like 1:30 in the morning, and she wasn't answering her phone, and I was getting like crazy, you know, and I was totally wasted. And I got in the truck, and I was driving around town looking for this girl, and lo and behold, her car's parked in her boyfriend's driveway. And in my alcoholic jealousy and insanity, I slashed the tires of his truck in his own driveway because his girlfriend was sleeping at his house. The next day, I woke up and just, oh my God, what did I do last night? You know, I have so many memories, or I had so many memories like that, it just turned my guts that I don't want to remember, of just, I did that. And I don't want to remember that I did that. And so, anyway, it was a couple years later. I mean, I saw this guy at a party, I had a couple drinks in me, and even then I was like, I knew I did the wrong thing. And I gave him a real half-assed apology. Well, I get into AA, and I'm working the 12 steps with my sponsor, and he said, now, Dan, when you're making a list of all the people you had harmed, God may bring to mind certain people that haven't yet made it onto your list, and they need to be written down too. And this guy kept coming up into my mind, and I thought, God, I've already dealt with this. I apologized to him, and the feeling that I had was like the hands of God reaching around me and squeezing me, and he said, you have not dealt with this. And so I started thinking about it a little bit more, and I started writing about it, and by that time, I had experienced what that felt like from the other side, because I was in a 5-year relationship with a young lady who had stepped out on me at the end of the relationship, which turned out to be a huge blessing, because now I could empathize with what I had taken from that guy, and I knew what it felt like. And I felt sorrier for what I had done. And, you know, when I was thinking about what I had done, I also thought, man, if I'm going to get cash register honest with this guy, I also owe him a new set of tires for his truck. Now, I don't want to scare you with any of your amends, because that's between you and God. And if God means for amends to take place, He'll give you the means to make the amends. And all I had to do was bring the willingness. God took care of the rest. So anyway, I knew where this guy worked. And, you know, I'm not looking forward to this. How can you look forward to this, especially in the beginning? I'm going to go and talk to this guy. Well, that's what the third step agreement. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. My sponsor described it to me like a contract, a contractual agreement. And he said, if God's too big of a word for you, you make an agreement to follow through with the 12 steps. Even if it looks scary. Even if you don't feel like you want to do it. The third step agreement is you do it anyway, regardless of how you feel. And I made that contract. I'm not going to break the contract, because if I break the contract, then God's not liable to hold up His end of the deal, and I know where that leads. So, okay, I'm praying, you know, I pull out some money, you know, and all alcoholics, maybe some more than others, are a little selfish, you know. I'd put a couple $100 in this envelope, and it was like I felt God's thumb pushing on me saying, you owe more than that. Oh, okay. I put some more money in this envelope, and I go down to his work, and I'm waiting for him to come out. And he comes outside, and I walk up there, and I am nervous. This is one of the first really big amends that I made, and I said, man, I had no right to involve my life I had no right to involve myself in your life in that way. I had no right to take what's yours. I said, I have since had a similar experience happen to me, and I know more intimately what that feels like from the other point of view. I said, I am really sorry for what I've done, and I hope that you would be able to forgive me. I said, I'm also really sorry about what I did to your truck. And I handed him the envelope with the money in it, and he looked at me, and he said, Dan, that was one of the hardest times of my life. And he said, I'm no longer with that girl. I haven't been with that girl for years. He said, I'm married now, and I got a 5-month-old son who's down in Grand Rapids who just went through heart surgery. And I can really use that money right now. He said, I forgive you. And when I turned and started walking back to my car, I felt the spiritual weight come off of me. And I couldn't see what came off of me, but I could feel this thing come off of my shoulders, come off of my head, and I felt lighter. I felt alive. I was living underneath that spiritual burden for so many years that I had begun to think that it was normal. I had so many of those things, dark shadows of the past, phantoms. I didn't even know what that thing was, but God took it away in that moment. And it hasn't come back. That was permanent. That's like concrete. That's not going away. I see this guy around town sometimes. He invited me to play basketball with him and his friends. It's finished. I just did another one. A girl. Oh, man, I was with this. She was a good girlfriend. Man, I was just like, I just used her, you know. She kept a job. I was crashing at her place. She's keeping up this apartment. And I was just so selfish. I never chipped in. I tried making an amends. I did it verbally. I wrote to her. She said that she forgave me, but I didn't feel any absolution. I didn't feel clean of it. And how badly do you really want it? And then, okay, God, what else? And I started thinking about all the money. I gotta put my money where my mouth is. And I asked her, can I please send you some money? I feel guilty about this. I don't know how else to get it off my back but to pay you. And I said, I'm not trying to involve myself back in your life or anything. I got to get right with you. And she gave me her PayPal thing, and I started sending her money. And I said, man, I owe you a lot, and I'm not going to be able to pay it all in one go. I'm going to have to make payments. Free of that one, though, too. She said, I can tell you're serious. I gave her a chunk of change, but it didn't end up being as much as I was ready to. I was prepared to pay her more. And she said, you don't need to pay me anymore, thank you. And I feel that same clean on the inside. I feel clear. That isn't holding me down anymore. I had another one. I used to steal a lot. I used to steal from the local hardware store. The owner of the hardware store, his name is Dan, too. And I'm a carpenter. I do remodeling work. And so I'm in there a lot. And I noticed that my sense of guilt for having stolen from there when I was like 14, 15 years old, I was trying to make up for it by purposefully spending more money at the local hardware store rather than driving up to Home Depot and getting a better price. So I was trying to indirectly make up for my sense of guilt, and it never really worked. And I'm getting more serious with myself about just facing things. Not skirting around the issue, not hiding from it, but just me and God, we're going to go face this. And I was in the hardware store one day, and I mean, they know me by name. They see me in there all the time, and Dan's talking to me, and he's all bubbly and excited, and hey, how you doing today? And I just feel incredibly guilty. And I I go through the checkout line, I pay for my stuff. I'm sitting out in my car, and I made a commitment. I don't want to do this. I'm never going to be able to go back in this hardware store in my life if I go and face the owner and tell him that I've stolen from there. I don't want to do this. But I made a commitment to do it, whatever it took. So I pulled $100 out of my wallet, and I walked back into the hardware store, and Dan's in the paint department, and I walk up to him. He says, "Hey, what's up, Dan?" And I said, I gotta get straight with you. I used to come in here and steal, and it was so long ago, I don't even remember what or how much I was stolen. I was like 14, 15 years old. And I think I just did it for the adrenaline rush of stealing something, but I've been feeling really guilty about this, and I really want to make it up to you. And I handed him $100. I said, I think this will cover it, because nothing that I had taken from there was very big. And he looked at me, and he said, "Dan, you're a man of integrity and a man of God." He said, "I love them both." He said, "Why don't you go take that $100 and go donate it to a charity in both of our names?" And he said, "I forgive you." And I walked out of the hardware store, and it was like the sun was shining brighter. It was like some crud or something that was spiritually in front of my eyes had been removed. I felt more alive. I felt lighter again. And I was remodeling a bathroom across town that spring, and this is just my personal journey, whatever, but I was listening to a Christian radio station as I was in the bathroom, and they're having a fundraiser drive, and they're trying to raise $2,000, and they're $100 away from meeting their goal. So I got my phone, and I'm typing, "I want to donate $100 from Dan and Dan at True Value." And they announced it over the radio. They say, "Hey, if you need any hardware, go and see Dan at True Value Hardware." And he's starting, I'm thinking, wow, God, it's like you're giving him advertising as a result of this. A man's probably sending more business his way, really making up for it, And the radio station sent me a Bible and a CD for making a donation. When it came in the mail, I went back to the hardware store, and I told Dan what I had done with the money, and I gave him the Bible. And instead of making it more difficult to go into the hardware store, our relationship has never been better. I mean, they really trust me in there. They're excited to see me. I mean, that's kind of a memorable thing. Why would somebody come and admit something like that? Try to set it right. What's in it for him, So I've found that I can trust the principles of this program for guidance. Even when my mind tells me, "No, don't go this way, scary, danger." My mind had been in control of my life for years, and it led me down bad roads. So to give over my will and my life to a new set of principles or guidelines, it's like following that compass in the middle of the storm. Like my buddy going in open water. What can you rely on in that situation? Your mind? Your mind's freaked out, telling you, "Oh, turn around, go back," and then you end up getting lost. Where's the shore? I don't know. You got to learn to follow instruments. For navigation in darkness or in a storm, what can you rely on if you can't rely on the thinking of your own alcoholic mind and saying, "Go this way"? Well, every time I listen to my mind tell me go this way, a lot of times I end up in jail or something bad happens. So I need a new set of principles to guide me. And the principles that I've found in the 12 steps, you can rely on them. I'm here to tell you that these things, they're rock solid. You can poke at it from any angle you want, and it won't crumple. A principle is a truth. It's a foundation. You build your life around these principles, and you have a solid foundation. You always go back to the principles. If life's starting to get a little shaky and a little crazy, go back to the principles. It smooths out. I know that it works. Even when I'm afraid, I do it anyway. Okay, so I got more men's stories. Going back to the house story. Okay. So I'm down in Texas. I'm hoping that she wants to renew her lease, stay in the apartment. She said, "Dan, no, I'm going to move in with my boyfriend." Thinking, oh, God, I already passed that part. Deb, 6 months rent, cash in advance. Oh, thank you, God. Okay, so now I'm really going to go on this hike. And so I'd been living for 6 months all winter down in the Royal Palms RV park in this camper, and I started thinking, God, I really don't need this camper anymore. I'm going to go spend the next 6 months out in the woods in a tent. And I don't really want to burn the extra fuel dragging this camper all the way back to Michigan only to park it in the backyard. So I got a little bit of faith now, and I decided to pray that God would send me a buyer for my camper. And I told God, and nobody but God, that I wanted to sell that camper. I told him I wanted $4,500 for it. And I went to the church that night for a 7 o'clock AA meeting, and my friend Paul was sitting across the table from me, and just out of the blue, he said, "Dan, you still got that camper of yours?" "Why, Paul?" He said, "Well, my wife and I are looking for one just like it, and we'd be wondering if you'd be willing to sell." "Well, why don't you come to the RV park and have a look?" So they came to the RV park, they checked it over. "Yeah, this is perfect. How much do you want for it?" I said, $4,500. He said, "You know, that's kind of what I was thinking too." And he wrote me a check. It was a week and a half between these two miraculous events. I got 6 months rent in cash in advance and sold my camper. Between those two things happening, I had $8,600. And I have this picture in my mind of, you know, like the worst thing in the world for me is paperwork. Just hate it. So I picture like a secretary with this pile of paperwork sitting on the desk in front of her, and like, this stands in the way of her and her freedom. This is the worst possible thing. And it was as if God just like slid all the papers off the desk onto the floor and put the stack of cash in front of me and said, "You want to go for a walk?" And so I drove my van back to Michigan. I parked it, and some members of Alcoholics Anonymous took me down to Detroit. I got on the airplane and flew to Atlanta, Georgia. And I started walking. And it sounds really fun, you know. But I started off, my pack was heavy burden. And I was like 200 miles into the walk, you know, and the newness and excitement of the whole thing was starting to wane just a little bit. And my hips hurt, my feet hurt, my back hurt, everything hurt. I'm thinking, God, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. And I started praying, I need help. And in Hot Springs, North Carolina, the trail goes right through the downtown area, right along the sidewalk, because you have to go across a bridge before going back up in the woods. And right along that sidewalk, there was a little laundromat, and I got some stinky clothes, you know, so I decided to go in there and do my laundry. And I saw this guy in there, and he's got this little tiny backpack, and he's all dirty and scruffy looking, and he's a thru hiker, but how is he carrying a pack that is that small? And so I started talking to him, and he had thru hiked the Pacific Crest Trail the year before. It's nearly 2,700 miles long. So this guy's got some serious long-distance hiking experience. You know, the Pacific Crest Trail starts at the Mexican border, goes through California, Oregon, and Washington, and ends just on the other side of the Canadian border. And this guy knows what he's doing, you know. And I'm struggling out of this big old burden, this backpack. And he says, "Well, what are you carrying in there?" And so we did a thing called a pack shakedown. And you basically turn your backpack upside down and shake out the contents all over the floor. And he's helping me look through this stuff, and you know, I'd just gone through the steps with my sponsor, so I'm kind of making analogies of how this is like going through the steps in AA. And I think, man, this is kind of like doing a step 4 inventory, and he's kind of like a sponsor because he's got a little bit more experience than I do, and he's helping me look at these items, you know. And one of the first things this guy said is, he said, "What are you so afraid of?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Look at all this stuff." He says, "What are you so afraid of?" So I had this big heavy pump water filter, big ceramic filter, weighed a pound, instead of using something small. He wasn't even filtering his water. He was just drinking it out of the springs in the mountains. I had a big heavy synthetic sleeping bag because I was afraid of getting hypothermia, and I had actually been sweating in that sleeping bag because it was rated to a much lower temperature than what I actually needed. And you know, and I had the big pump water filter because I was afraid of getting giardia, you know. And it's like my fear always went to the max. I was carrying a Glock 23, a 40 caliber Glock 23 with a 180 grain flat nose full metal jacket. Yeah, I had an irrational fear of black bears, and I thought, well, I was reading stories on the internet about these Alaskan state troopers, and one of them had killed a grizzly bear with a 40 caliber service Glock, and so I thought, yeah, this will be enough for black bears. So I got a full box of ammunition, this pistol. I mean, he was saying, "What are you so afraid of?" And I began to realize that my fear was manifesting itself into real physical weight that was turning into a burden. These were mind projections of what might happen. It was an illusion. My mind always kept thinking, oh, the worst possible scenario. And the real worst case scenario was that I was carrying all this crap on my back to fix a problem in my head, and it was making me miserable in the moment. And I realized, you know, this guy who's carrying this little tiny backpack, he said, don't you have any faith? And he thought, oh, what do you mean? This guy believed in God. And he said, I'm just depending on God to provide the solution when the problem arises. He was depending on himself less to deal with life and leaning on God more. I mean, he was carrying enough to survive. Sometimes seems teetering on the edge a little bit, but it seemed to work for him. He was still alive. He had a lot of hiking experience. I sent 23 pounds worth of crap home after I met that guy. At 20, and talk about your burden being lifted, the weight off your shoulders. Once that weight was gone, I started to enjoy my hike. I realized that fear had similarly burdened me in my walk through life. I was worried about this happening or that happening. And my mind, it was causing me to not enjoy life. Constantly afraid of this and that. What's the solution to fear? The opposite of fear is faith. If you've got a teeter-totter with fear on one side and faith on the other, these are opposites. And I realized that I had to take the weight of my fear, slide it across the teeter-totter into faith, put that stuff into God's hands. Suddenly my burden became light. You mean I don't have to deal with this anymore? All I have to do to deal with is what's here and now. What has God given me to do at this moment? Beyond that, what is my worrying going to accomplish other than making me miserable right now? It doesn't fix it. So the more I've come to depend on God, the lighter my load has gotten, not only on the trail, but also off the trail and in life. I have less to worry about. Extemporaneous. I don't have all these thoughts going on in my mind to burden me. Oh, what if this happens? What if that happens? I've given it to God. You're going to die. I'm sorry, don't want to spook anybody here. We're all going to die. Do you want to run away from that fact, or do you want to make the most of your time here and really grow spiritually? Enjoy life. Man, I've gotten to go out to Hawaii the last couple winters. I went to the AA World Convention down in Atlanta. I spent last winter out in Hawaii. I was out there for 2.5 months, planning on going back. It's like, man, since I quit, when I quit drinking, I was living in the basement at my mom's house. I had lost my driver's license for a year, had no job, no girlfriend, no nothing. Life is miserable, you know what I mean? I got a house, I got a car, I got my driver's license, I got money in the bank, I have want for nothing. God's given me everything. This program has given me everything, because this program has opened up a relationship to God, which I don't claim to know or fully understand, but I know that it is there. And you can call it whatever you want. That's the beauty of AA. No one's trying to hammer on you, you got to believe this way. It's like, no, you just got to open yourself up to the possibility that there is something way bigger than your reality that you currently conceive of. There's something way bigger going on here. And I know that's true. And yeah, I want to have more conscious contact with it. It's almost like a new driving force in my life. Alcoholics and drug addicts have strong drive. When you find something that's exciting to you, that you want more of, you pursue it. And spirituality has become that for me. Personal growth, life itself. It's interesting, fascinating. Everything used to look so dull to me until I had a drink, But I don't feel that way anymore. Not at all.